Here we are for episode 3 of Dualistic Unity Social. I really like these episodes. They're quick, they're punchy. We kind of get right to the point. This morning, we're doing it right before we do a Patreon tier 2 group. So normally we don't do these on Thursday morning. We've just been on Instagram. Now these are going to be social episodes. And that means that we're also going to have another DU social episode later on this afternoon. So if you want to inform that episode, do join us on Patreon.
Yeah, no, it's cool, and shout out Restream for this setup we got here because it's a lot of fun coming on and still being in the same sort of podcast feeling environment, and yet being able to be on Instagram and Twitch and YouTube and everything at the same time. So yeah, these and doing 2 today. That'll be fun. So feel free as always to comment with questions and thoughts and any insights that you're having, and hop on Patreon. We do have a tier 2 group right after this, and you can get a 7-day free trial. So it's totally free. So there's nothing stopping you from at least giving it a shot, because those groups are always a blast, and everyone hops on and just shares a bunch of good shit, and people share things. It's not always me and Ray answering stuff. It's everyone interacting with everyone else and sharing things and helping each other out. So yeah, if you've been on the fence about Patreon, definitely take advantage of that free trial and at least see what it's all about and see if it is something you may be interested in.
Absolutely. You also get access to information that other people don't. Like, for example, earlier this week, Andrew and I discussed the possibility of having a mini retreat, because we've done 2 of the mini retreats and 2 major retreats before now, and they've all went off perfectly. And so we thought to ourselves, well, it'd be nice if we could do a summer retreat end of July in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And so we threw that out to our Patreon subscribers. We threw that out to our supporters and said, hey, you want to do this? Let's see if we have enough people. If we can do it, let's all get together, because what better way to spend a weekend in the summer than hanging out, being insightful and vulnerable, and with community members that you've gotten to know online. And so, yeah, everybody came together in a matter of days, and we are doing a mini retreat in Vancouver on July 27th to July 31st. Just fucking crazy. But that's all on Patreon for stuff like that. If you want to know what we're doing, last minute stuff, if you want to know what we're doing behind the scenes, if you want to talk to us in between episodes, Patreon. Absolutely. Otherwise, you can join us in our free group chat every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern time, which you can register for at our website, dualisticunity.com. And I bring that one up specifically because yesterday's group was awesome.
Yeah, it was a blast. So I have some stuff we can get into here, but I just was on a walk with my mom talking about, and we were getting into just, I was talking, and I had shared with her just kind of everything that this was a couple days ago, just been, I don't know, feeling, and kind of explained the entire retreat and things I went through, and my mushroom trips and all that stuff. And she's she's awesome and very responsive and curious about all that stuff. And so today we were kind of digging in a little bit deeper, and it's been an interesting, because I can go on about like expressing the illusion of division, basically, and I sometimes catch myself feeling like I use it as a avoidance tactic. But I'm also like, this goes back to our episode we posted earlier this week, which is fucking awesome one, season 5, episode 6, a fountain of intelligent potential. Was that the title? Yeah, fountain of intelligent potential. That was a very good episode. But just I like, I find myself getting caught in like understanding that my desire to figure something out is the issue, in a sense, like the mulling over a situation, trying to find an endpoint, a cessation of the feeling. It's like the mulling over it is the feeling I'm trying to create a cessation of, in a sense. And so I both realize that, but also find it interesting how, I don't know, like the perspective of everything that we go through and the shit we go through subjectively, internally, because of the illusion of division, because we perceive ourselves as divided, doesn't doesn't take away from the experience of being divided at all. And so, like, although certain feelings stem from that illusion, there's still the experience of them. And so sometimes I find myself trying to figure shit out and just realizing that it's like the desire to figure something out that is the thing I'm trying to figure out how to let go of. Like, figuring out how to let go of something is the thing that I can let go of, and that'll not clear the air at all, but at least set you on, like, see things a little bit differently. But I don't know. I think this has been good for me because I've realized how tough it can be sometimes. Like, it keeps trying to come up, and it's like I feel like I'm taking effort, but it's not effort because my idea of it being effort just keeps it going. So anyway, we got into a whole depth of a conversation, and coming out of it, it's like I finished it with, I feel like sometimes I use that as an avoidance tactic. And I kind of like discounted the entire conversation that we had, despite it being a great conversation, because I realize how much I don't know, I feel like for a long time, I've kind of used that as an avoidance tactic of the experience of suffering to a degree. And so that there wasn't really any endpoint to this statement, but just, I don't know, expression of thoughts.
We always bring this back down to, it's so funny. We had this conversation with somebody yesterday who was saying, like, in my job, I often don't feel smart enough. And so I want to try and feel smarter. And then I end up not feeling as smart because now I'm all confused and I'm trying to get somewhere and there's so much in my way. And what do we say? It's like, well, stop trying to be smarter. Just recognize that all you have to do is be confused for long enough. And that turns into a recognition because that's what you are. Your intelligence, your process. So this conversation is really easy because it's not that you're trying to get over the mulling over. It's that you are trying to detach from the process of mulling over. You're still involved with it, like you're the one trying to get somewhere, rather than this is your brain going through the experience of trying to understand something. You're still taking ownership of the stream of thought, like, oh, this is me doing it, instead of this is what I'm experiencing currently, right? And so, like, it's about taking the pressure off again. And so what I mean is, I love mulling over shit. There's a thousand thoughts going through my head at any given point. If I just look at them, you're not trying to end them, right? It's the need to get to an end result, to get to some understanding at the end of it, that really trips us up. It really is. And it's just because you're never going to get to an end point. You're never going to get to a final understanding of everything. Your brain's always going to continue to process, always, as long as you are alive and experiencing things, right? And it's always going to process it through thoughts. It's always going to process it through all of these concepts that you've learned to use over time. So as soon as you focus in on that stuff, you're like, oh my God, I'm working all this stuff out. It's like, yeah, well, that's the experience of the thoughts because you're soaking yourself into them. Right. And that's okay. I do that shit all the time. I have no problem getting a little frustrated, getting a little sad, getting a little upset about things, taking things a little too seriously. It's just that I have a sensitivity now to when that's getting out of hand.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think I've had, like, can be hard on myself in that sense of, like, thinking that processing shouldn't be happening, and looking under the hood and seeing a lot in there and being like, having a judgment of it, like there should be less or some fucking shit like that. Like, there should be less happening there. Why is there so much going on? Why am I still stuck on this? Why am I still going through this, and it's like that's always been there. It's just you're looking at it and trying to erase it. It's like spending your life, I don't know, looking at reality, turning around, seeing that there's like a lot of processes happening that are like, I don't know, like almost behind you. And then you're seeing everything, and then you turn around, you're like, holy shit, that's a lot. That's a lot going on there. I think there should be less. It's just like a fucking subjective judgment of it, as opposed to seeing like, yeah, there's always been that. It's always been there. And it is like, to a degree, like it is what it is. And it's just the concern. Like it's always that. It's the thought that something different should be happening, but also as it's like keeps coming up. And then what I recognized and still didn't like let go of was that going through it, like it creates a spiral, like judging yourself for getting caught in something and then thinking about all the time that you've spent caught in something, looking like I'm on, a walk with my mom and dog and it's a nice day out and like why the fuck am I feeling this way? I shouldn't be feeling this way, judging myself for going through it, which is the continuation of that process of going through it. And it's like it's so funny when you see it, and like until you do, it's fucking not funny at all. It's the least funny thing in the world because it's the entirety of the experience that you're going through, but it's just up to you of like what point you want to, it's almost like what point you want to be okay with it as opposed to not okay with it, whatever you're going through, whatever the overarching concern with it is. Like there's a lot there, and then the concern on top, and then the concern about getting concerned. I shouldn't be getting concerned. It's that spiral, it's and so yeah, like at what point do you want to let it go? But then a part of me doesn't want to let it go, and then part of me is like, sunk cost fallacy, like, oh, I've already dug in this deep, just got to keep going, and thinking that you're going to keep going to a cessation of it, thinking that you're digging down deeper into bullshit, and you're like, I got to keep going because you think that if this is the ground, you're gonna like pop up, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna keep going until, or like, you're digging into the world, and like, oh, if I keep going, I'll get to the other side. It's like, no, you're just continuing to dig deeper straight down into bullshit that you're continuing to spiral through, thinking that there's a spot, a depth that you get to that's it, as opposed to the depth of that being like, the extreme shit that people do when they're going through a bunch of mental anguish. Like that's the end of that digging. And I don't know, I forget that sometimes, I guess. And despite being able to say all the words and do all the shit, like it's still that's not it because the words aren't it. And like the knowing of what to do isn't it. And that's I think I was having a conversation with someone recently just about how it's funny how one of my friends, his one of his family members is like a relationship therapist, and he was saying how ridiculous it is because she's had like a bunch of failed marriages, and yet she's talking to people about how to fix their marriage. And that's kind of like, as silly as that seems, like that's kind of how I feel. Like if someone else came to me with the same shit that I was going through, I'd probably have shit to tell them. And yet, because I'm taking ownership of this, it's like you can't look at it from the same point of view as long as you're the one taking ownership for it.
Okay. So there's a bunch of stuff I've got here. It's going to be somewhat frustrating how lightly I take all this, but I'm telling you right now, it's the secret to it. And there is a reason that I have the nonchalant attitude towards my own awareness that I do. It's because it becomes as heavy as I perceive it to be. So that's super useful to know. When you have a movie running in the living room and it's on the TV and somebody comes in and they want to talk to you, but other people are watching the movie, so you walk a little bit away, but you turn the volume down a little bit, right? If you turn the volume down a little bit and you've walked away a little bit, did the movie stop playing? No. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm saying here is that what you're looking for is an either or perspective. You're like, either I'm in awareness, in the present, focused on what's happening right now, or I'm in the shit. And I would like to introduce a third option that they're both happening at the same time. And the only thing that you get to do is decide where you're focused. Are you close to the TV listening to it? Or are you walking away and turning the volume down a bit? Doesn't stop it from continuing on. This is where we make the mistake. Like you were like, I don't want to stop thinking about it because there's got to be some resolution. It's like there's an insight in there for sure. What makes you think you need to be participating in that process in order for that insight to come to the surface? It's already processing. You're already processing. It's just that now you're getting in there like, oh, I got to focus on these thoughts. Otherwise, it'll never result in something. You don't think your brain knows how to survive. You don't think your brain knows how to process information and context. It's been doing it your whole life. Right? So you don't always have to be in there playing with it, focused on it. You can be. In fact, it really has gravity. When you start focusing on your thoughts, they draw you right in. They're like, focus on this. They're important because to them, they're all very important. Remember that the perception is always valid from the point of view of the perceiver. And every thought that you have is a point of view of some perceiver that you could be. So as soon as you focus on the thought, you become the perceiver that that thought is trying to embody. And then you perceive it the way that it is part of. It's a whole thing. It's not like you can just look at the thought from outside and not suddenly be in the thought. It's like going into a whole world where suddenly you have a part to play. Or you can step out and let all of those worlds exist within you. Let all of those possibilities exist within you as they process, as your brain tries to understand who the hell you are and what this is all about. And it never will. It never will. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to continue to process. That's the whole thing. Now you can pay attention to it and worry about it, try to find some resolution, or you can accept that it will never stop, that there is no resolution, that all there is this ongoing, deeper recognition. That's it. And so this ties into a question: how do you handle it when it gets out of hand? Responsibility. Responsibility and sensitivity is really the two things. Like I can feel when I'm getting caught up in my thoughts now. That wasn't always the case. All of a sudden, I'd be in them for days going, Jesus Christ, what the hell happened in the last few days? And it's just because I'd get so caught up in the emotions and the urgency and the resolution and then all of this stuff I needed to solve it, needed to find the understanding of these thoughts. And so when you're in that, all you can do is recognize that you're learning what confusion feels like. That's what it is. That's what the path to self-awareness is going through confusion. The steps of ego development are just other layers of confusion. False certainty upon false certainty upon false certainty until finally you're old enough to accept uncertainty. Right? And that's where you find clarity. It's not an escaping the uncertainty, right? It's an accepting the uncertainty and allowing yourself to be intelligence processing that uncertainty. And so when I get carried away, I go, oh, I'm doing it again. And then I laugh at myself. And that's pretty much it. That's as easy as it is. I'm doing it again. I'm doing it. Not anyone else, not anything else, because it's just me. And I laugh. And I carry on and I focus back to what's real. Because the only thing that's happened is not that I've made a mistake. It's not that I'm suddenly, oh God, I'm thinking about things again. No, I'm focused on thought again. I haven't done a single thing wrong except just direct my gaze over to the chaos a little bit more. And I got sucked into it. And the best way out of it is to relax and recognize it goes on without you. So you don't need to be paying attention to it. You've never had control of it. All you've ever done is add distortion to it. Just relax. And like I said, it's annoyingly nonchalant, but it works.
Yeah, and I even felt that, and it's funny because like, I'll get on these calls and just be in the experience, and, like, all of a sudden all whatever shit I was going through before, whether it's a Patreon group or a podcast episode or a live stream. Like I come out of it and the shit I was going through before it just like isn't there anymore because I or it, and that's I guess it is like it's still there. It's just I shifted my gaze. And because right now, like I'm sitting here listening to you going through going through this experience, like those things aren't there that were there an hour ago, or I'm not focused on them anymore. And so I'm not feeling them. And it's like where they go, I gotta and then a part of me is like, I gotta figure it out. But it's I don't like being involved in the situation that you're in, that's shifting your gaze, being focused on what's actually real, focused on what's actually happening is the shifting of your gaze. They don't go anywhere. It's just that your attention goes somewhere else. They're still all there. Like all the shit that I was thinking through an hour ago is still there. They didn't disappear. It's just I'm looking at something else now. And I even was feeling that sort of thing. And there was so I was feeling like, oh, I can just shift my attention. And then part of me like wouldn't let myself, and I'm talking like I'm two fucking entities right now, but part of me wouldn't let myself exact like part of me wouldn't like I could feel that and then be like I would be like no I gotta keep digging into this and part of me was like feeling a little lighter and there's like no you can't you gotta figure this out and it would like I would dive back in to it but a big part of it too is just the assumption of like I'm going through something like even that and we talk about when I've said it so many times when someone's talking about being in a rut or being in a lull. It's the idea that you're in a rut or a lull that's providing you with this false certainty that's creating a continuation of the process, despite that assumption that you're quote unquote going through something right now being bullshit. Like, it's not to say the experience of going through something isn't not bullshit, but what are you looking at? And you're just continuing to look at it. So you're interpreting it by looking at all of that shit going on in the background as going through something. But if you shift your gaze, oh, all of a sudden you're not going through something as much. It's like you're still going through shit. You're always going through something, as you said, like different. It's not awareness versus going through the shit. It's both at the same time and also neither because those aren't even things that you can conceptually understand. Like going through the shit is a conceptual assumption. Being aware is just an assumption of something. So it's always both. Like there's always both of them happening all the time. It's just where's your focus? Where is your gaze? And so I think just I'm realizing the more we talk about this, how much I had the assumption that over the last year and a half, 2 years, 5 years, that there was less shit. It was like it went from a lot of shit and a little bit of awareness to a lot of awareness and a little bit of shit. But it wasn't even that. It was just my focus shifted away from focusing on the shit all the time. Like I would spend my entire days focused on the shit. That shit hasn't gone away. Like it's always still there in potential. It's just where your focus where it lies. And so it's always both. And yeah, as you said, it comes down to that responsibility for it and understanding that like it's still going to be there whether you're paying attention to it or not. It's like at a I don't know, like there's a coffee shop in New York, like a really fucking big Starbucks that has this whole like it shows all the processes of the beans going on. It's like something you can look at. It's like I don't know, people like watching that. And it's all this shit going on. It's like that's kind of it's behind like a plastic plexiglass wall. And it's like you can look at that or you can see that that's always going to be going on. And if you're sitting there with someone like be involved in the conversation, like all that shit is still happening. That doesn't change. It doesn't settle. It doesn't even calm down necessarily. Like it's still going through the same exact thing, whether you're paying attention to it or not. And it doesn't need your attention in order to continue going. It's going to keep going. It's going to keep processing, whether you're paying all of your attention to it or not.
You know, I've said it before and I've said it 1,000 times, and I'm sure I'll say it 1,000 more times. Our biggest obstacle is our fucking self-image. It really is, because we actually have this idea of ourselves, like even right now. Okay, so I've introduced the concept of you not only being here in what's happening, but you also having the simultaneous process of whatever your perception of what's happening is. Okay. That is still underselling what's happening. It's not just that you're here and you have a perception of what's happening that's also happening. You have all perceptions of what's happening that are also happening. You can access all different perceptions of what you're going through right now. So all of a sudden, reality becomes not just what you're going through, but how you look at what you're going through. And if how you look at what you're going through is an infinite spectrum, then there's infinite things to look at and be aware of. But that means in order to access that spectrum, you have to be willing to look at certain parts of yourself, like the parts that are driven by fear or need or desire or a sense of lack. Because it's the only way that you can be aware of how much influence those perspectives are having on all of the other perspectives and the process as a whole, because you're avoiding. Every part of yourself you avoid gets bigger. It has an impact on everything else. The only way to crop that down is to look at it, be aware of it, watch it as it's interplaying with everything else. So that way it doesn't get out of hand in responsibility and awareness all the time. And so we have this idea like, oh, okay, so I'm thinking about my shit. That's all that's happening. It's like, man, okay. You're thinking about your shit. That's what you're focused on right now. You're also thinking about all the things that are going well for you, which you're not focused on. You're also thinking all the things that didn't happen, which you're not focused on. You're thinking about all the things that could happen, which you might not be focused on. Right? You're also focused on what's happening right now, which obviously you're not focused on. You're just focused on one perception. And because you're focused on that one perception, it's drawn you in, and now you're the perceiver experiencing the perception. Because that's the only way to experience a perception, is as the perceiver that matches it. And then we have an idea of ourselves, and it locks us in it, like we're in a room that is an illusion. And it's not until we go, oh right, I made another room, that the door reappears.
So, so you mentioned looking at it. Like, I'm curious about that point, because I guess that's where faith in yourself comes in, like the willingness to look at it without getting overwhelmed by it. Because there's a part of me, and I think a big part of me, that just has avoided looking at certain components of that for a very long time. And part of me is like, how the fuck do you look at it without getting sucked into it?
You don't. You get sucked into it.
Fuck.
That's what you're doing. That's the process of this. Remember, we always talk about finding balance, that the only way to do so is to go back and forth in imbalance, or what feels like imbalance. And in doing so, you start to get more sensitivity to what the middle is, what the environment is, even what balance is. This is part of that. You know, it's interesting. You described it as a lot of shit, little awareness, and a lot of awareness, little shit. It's like, yeah, you see the sway, right? And all that's happening is you're seeing more of each side. Now the whole thing is widening. Now the next evolution, or rather the next recognition, opens up the field. Now you're like, oh my God, there are so many things out, other things to get lost in. And so it's being able to recognize that anything that you do get lost in, by its very nature, is going to feel personal. Doesn't mean it is. Right? It's always about the perceiver and the perceived, all of our experience. Right. And so it's, again, it's getting stuck in one, in thinking that your idea of yourself is the truth, that you end up locked in one, or a very narrow spectrum. And so it's always just about going into it, feeling it, and going, right, this is in there all the time. All the time. Not, oh, I've done something wrong in getting here, but, oh, I found a new trail.
Yeah. Okay. Something else in regards to this that I've been feeling is, uh so like, over the last while, couple years, I've recognizing that I'm not what I think has helped, and there's a part of me that's like, uh, started to translate that as an avoidance tactic, but it's not, because like, that's been my go-to strategy whenever shit comes up is like, "Oh, yeah, but I'm not that." And then it kind of there's like a cessation
But
of
how
it, and
quickly?
n
See, I'd say you're
yeah.
testing your tolerance, right? Like, I won't immediately remind myself I'm not that anymore because I'm not afraid of the experience, right? So we spend so much of our time getting sucked into it that immediately telling somebody like, you can come up for air, they're like, oh, and they come up for air, and then they almost never want to go back under the water. You know what I mean? Because they spent so long feeling like they were going to drown. So it's getting over the fear. It's being able to go into it, and this is why psychedelic experiences are so useful. It's because all of a sudden you're immersed in the possible perceptions that you could hold on to. The uncertainty is there, the freedom is there, the whole shebang is there, and you're not holding on to your narrative, so you can just go in any direction you want based on whatever it is you're holding on to or whatever it is you get caught in, right? And so the more you practice that, the more you recognize, like, right, even if I get caught, though, it only lasts for so long, right? It really is faith. Like understanding that you're always in process, that you're always refining this, whether you understand you are or not, so long as your intention is to do so. Because what sets us up for failure is our determination to stagnate, right? But if you get caught and then later on you're like, oh yeah, I got caught. And it could take years, it could take months, it could take weeks, it could take days, it could take hours or minutes. And it really just comes down to continuing to go through it without fear. Understanding those days that you feel worthless, you are learning something about the feeling of being worthless, not the reality of being worthless.
Yeah, fuck. That's a very, very good point. I think it's because it feels so real and all-encompassing and all of everything being in it that I think I just thought that wasn't it. Like, I was being a failure if I got caught in it for a certain amount of time, as opposed to seeing it as a component of experience. Like, in order to know what feeling worthless or feeling like a dumbass or feeling like you have nothing to say feels like, you have to experience what it feels like. And it has to feel entirely real in order to understand it. You can't have like a half-assed experience of being in the shit. And so it's like, so then with that, without having so much fear of being in the shit, I feel like part of me wants to think like, all right, so maintain, 1% of this is still not it. But that you almost can't even do that. It also almost has to be, for it to be the entirety of your experience and the fullness of that experience of going through the shit, it has to be the entirety. So like,
Your last
how
trip
do
is a perfect example.
yeah.
You learned so much from that. And it's because there was none of that governor of that safety of like, I know it's not real. And you let it go. And as a result of that, you went as deeply into it as you possibly could have I guess, tolerated at that point. And you learned a truck ton. Right, and that's the point, is the deeper you experience it, the more you learn from it, the easier it is to empathize with everybody, and the less influenced you are by this background stuff that you've actually now looked at, right? But that's it, is you have to accept, in order to get that depth, you must experience the perception fully, which means the perception that you're a failure, that you're failing in the path. That is also a lesson. That is also just a perception, a result of a self-image that unfortunately all of us are suffering through because we don't look at it in the face. It's the only way to be free of it. It's the only way to look at everybody else and remind them that they can be free of it because you are. Not because you're telling them, but because you've looked it in the face and it honestly just doesn't faze you. It doesn't frighten you. When somebody's like, "Oh man, I'm having the hardest week," and you're like, "Yeah, yeah," and it doesn't, like, you're not disagreeing. You're not like, everything's gonna be all right. It's just like, yeah, that's part of the ride. Helmet.
Oh man. Yeah. A lot of what, because there's been things you've said over the last year and a half that like sometimes I get it and I'm like, I know what he's talking about, and sometimes I don't. And there was uh something you said in Discover Transcendence that had to do, fuck, now I forget what it was exactly as you're going through that experience of being in the shit. It has to be all encompassing. It'll come back. But yeah, like understanding that you have to be able to go through it and face it and experience it to know what it's like, but it doesn't mean it has to sink you, but it can't be both. Like it can't be maintaining a degree of awareness in the shit, because that is the experience of maintaining a degree of awareness in the shit. Like in order to know the shit, it's got to be all the all the shit, and then you can, you know, come up for air when you recognize it, but then it kind of reframes that experience as an experience instead of a failure, instead of wasted time, instead of, and this is what we were talking with someone on Patreon yesterday, like that feeling of going through years of your life not recognizing that you're not what you think feels like wasted time. It's like, no, you just have a lot of experience into what it's like not having that not recognizing that you're not what you think. So then, and then that allows you to understand that. That's another understanding that you now have, but it doesn't mean that it has to define the entirety of what you are and mean something. It's like a experience that you have, not what you are. So, yeah.
That's that's interesting. I wanted to mention to everybody because you brought it up. Discover Transcendence is a video that I made like 5 years ago or something. Wow, that's a long time ago now. It's 48 minutes. It just runs through a bunch of three things that your brain does that gets in your way all the time, only because you're not aware that your brain is doing it. So if you get a chance to check it out, it's on YouTube. It's called Discover Transcendence. Do that. In 5 minutes, we're going to be taking a break for 15 minutes after that, and then jumping on Patreon for an hour and a half call where you can jump on the call with us, talk to us, ask us questions, share your stories, share your victories, whatever it might be. We would love to see you there. It is very much worthwhile. There's a 7-day free trial right now. We do groups 5 days a week, and it's honestly just because I've been chatting with Andrew now for a year and a half, and as he said a few times in this conversation, he's like, "You said things before that didn't click." He's like, I'm starting to understand what you said. And the only reason that's the case is because we're always going through what it is we're prepared to see based on what it is we've already seen. Like we are really a processing machine. We're always gaining more context as long as we're willing to keep our eyes open and continue to embrace the unknown or embrace uncertainty, because then we're expanding all the considerations that we're able to process at the time. And so you're going to be able to go back to season one and season two of the podcast. And I know, Andrew, you and I are going to do a commentary series on season one at some point. That's going to be a lot of fun. But all of these things, like you'll notice that they're the same insights. Context is going to widen. You're going to get involved. Try not to take it too seriously. It's always like that. And this is why the best advice I've ever given you, and I will say this to everybody here, keep it light. Remember, you add the weight. You really do. If all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm suffering all the time, I got to fix this. That's part of the suffering. It doesn't seem like it. You're like, I got to resolve this thought. No. The thought that you're attached to is the suffering. It's the perception of the suffering, right? So the only way out of that is to disempower it. And the only way out of that, or only way to do that, is to empower yourself, which is to recognize that the thought comes from you. It's not happening to you. You are not a victim here. You are the whole fucking experience, which means for the perception to exist, you must play the part of the perceiver. Which perceiver are you willingly playing, out of habit or otherwise?
Yeah, and that understanding allows you to continue to see it from alternate perspectives, but when you're in it, it's like there's only the one perspective, or there's you feel like there's only the one perspective of feeling that way. But yeah, it's fucking nuts how it's like gotta be, and it's like not even that it's gotta be, because that's again settling on something, and it's as long as you uh want it to be, in a sense. So uh uh what the fuck? That's unreal. Oh man, that's fucking hilarious. Oh my god. Ugh. I got no words for that.
I thought that was
That's
a good way
awesome.
to end the episode for sure. We are going to continue this conversation because it's important. It is really important as you start to understand the gravity that your perceptions really have, to understand that there is nothing wrong with being pulled into them. In fact, it's the resistance to being pulled into them that makes them stronger. Oddly enough, all of those experiences you're afraid of having pull you in that much stronger. They become that much more of a force. You have to run from them, avoid them, build up defenses, all that. You're making them into something that they don't need to be. You could just look at them, feel them, understand it means nothing about you personally, but that it is just a perception of what it is you're going through. That's all it is. One of an infinite fucking spectrum that all seem valid when you're in them. That's the most frustrating part about it, is when you're in the perception you're in, you're like, this is the only perception that's valid. Yes, says the perceiver that matches that perception. Absolutely. Always. The perception will always justify its existence. You are playing a part until you recognize it's one of a spectrum. Then you have choice, because it's you. It's all you. But it's just that. So this has been a lot of fun. I'm going to throw the QR code up here for Patreon. If anybody would like to join us, it's an hour and a half call today. A lot of fun. 5 days a week we do these groups, and we would love to see you there. I'm going to pass it over to Andrew. We'll wrap up, and then we'll see you very shortly.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in digging into the perception, and like you've said that before, like the perceiver will, or the perception will match what the perceiver is perceiving, or the point of view that the perceiver is taking. And like I don't even know if I necessarily fully understand that still. And yeah, it's crazy, like feeling like I don't even know, like unclear as fuck. It's like I can't even understand things that I feel like were obvious in other, I don't know, mentalities or times in my life. And it's
Just got
like,
to be
and
confused long enough.
yeah, I know. It's strange, but anyway, this has been fun, I'll say. I'll leave it at that, but excited to hop on Patreon in a bit too.
Yeah, and understand, again, I understand my nonchalance is annoying. It's the only way I can pass it on. So I will talk to you in a few minutes. Thank you everyone for joining us, and as always, we'll see you next time. There's also another episode of DU Social later on today, so catch us there if you can. Talk to you soon.